Welcome to the History with Ali podcast. Today I'm interviewing author Janet Wertman about her new book, Nothing Proved, about the young Elizabeth. Well, thank you, Janet, so much for joining me to have this conversation today. I think we go back to Tudor Tuesdays.
Yes.
During the Clubhouse era.
During the Clubhouse era, that's right. Absolutely. You had some of the best comments and we had some really good discussions there.
We did. But off the bat, so we're both American. How did you come to the Tudor world? Because I know it was probably barely touched in our schooling. Where did you find the Tudors?
Television! Masterpiece Theater, The Six Wives of Henry VIII and Elizabeth R. Keith Mitchell. He has imprinted Henry onto me, I think, and Glenda Jackson as Elizabeth. It was an amazing series. And that's really what got me going all of that time. I mean, they say that television and fiction pulls you in to history, and I definitely found that. I mean, from there I was really young, and so I went on to a whole Jean Plady kick and read all her stuff and then just expanded from there, and that's where we are now. I usually joke that if I did live in England, I would strap a metal detector to my arm and just spend my entire time traveling looking for all of that other stuff, because you just trip over it when you're over there. You have to look for it more when you're here.
Have you been able to go to England?
Yeah, that is how I got the cover to my second book, The Path to Somerset. It was at Sudeley Castle. So at that point, I was in the middle of writing The Path to Somerset, Elder Statesman Somerset, and that neither of those was my Edward Seymour. And then all of a sudden, I turned the corner in Sudeley, and there's a portrait hanging over the fireplace, and it's like, oh, that's my Edward. And they allowed me to use the photograph for my cover. I'm still grateful to that. At that, I was so happy to find that. You find things when you're there that you would not otherwise find, because they had never really digitized. They have an amazing collection that they hadn't really done a lot with in terms of putting it out there online. You really can't find that image.
Yeah, and that's actually a subject I'm really interested in. Once you go from being a huge fan to then doing new research, and you must have been communicating with the museum. I worked at a very small museum, and I know even if somebody wanted to use a photograph of the founder, they would have to pay for that. Was it kind of similar for the covers of your books?
Yes. They had the form, and then it was a question of, well, can we just make it clear that I'm also allowed to use it on bookmarks? I want to make bookmarks. Because apparently no other author had gone there and wanted to use one of their works for that.
Oh, that's cool.
No, I need this and for that. And tote bags. Have we tried tote bags? Which I haven't done that, but apparently I could.
So how did you license this portrait for Nothing Proved? So it's the young Elizabeth.
That is the wonderful thing, is that is in the public domain.
Oh.
So the Scratch portrait, totally public domain, and you are allowed to use it. And a cover designer, I don't know, I'm allowed, I forget how many 100,000 copies I'm allowed of the book before I have to upgrade my license.
Oh.
So for the window and whatever else. So he dealt with all of that.
Do you choose the portraits? I mean, you chose the Edward Seymour, but did you choose this one, or is it like a collaboration with publishers? Or
I self-publish. Basically, when I entered the market, the idea that somebody would want to read about Jane Seymour, this was back in 2016. No, nobody liked any of the Seymours. And even at TudorCon, when I would open up a bunch of my talks, it's, who likes the Seymours? Not a single hand. Who hates them? All of them go up there. So no one was ever going to want a book about Jane Seymour and the rest of the Seymours. And now with Elizabeth, people always say, oh, she's been done. And I admit she's been done a lot, but I maintain I do it differently. So totally, I was on my way to answer a question and then I got sidetracked.
Oh no, I'm with you. I think that one of the things that keeps it fresh is that there's been so much new research on Elizabeth.
Yes.
Like the Tracy Borman and Boleyn and Elizabeth book. Did you get a chance to see that one?
I read Tracy Borman's book, and that was wonderful. Yeah, there is a lot of research that feels like people are just going, oh wait, hidden in plain sight. It has been here all along. And people are coming to this with new and different insights because somebody will say something and it'll just stick forever.
Yeah, and just as you said that, it seems like these things are popping up in plain sight. I think in Tracy's book, she talks about Elizabeth reinstating Anne as queen, and that was there the whole time. And for all these years, we've been like, Elizabeth never mentioned her mother. And then now it's coming out with the checkers ring. And you talk about this in the book, so I don't want to jump forward, but she had a lot of the Boleyn family with her in her court. So I do think this is a perfect time for this trilogy.
I'm hoping. See, I never found, so in my view, Elizabeth not mentioning Anne was very strategic, but it's always been, and at least to me, very clear, she had all of the Boleyns around her, and there were a couple of things she did here and there, like she's recorded having gone to visit a church with a lot of the Boleyn relatives buried and spending a lot of time there before she went back to, we have these little vignettes that show that she really valued her, and the coronation descriptions of the Anne Boleyn pageantry and talking about her. So there was a bunch of mentioning done discreetly because the real money was talking about Henry and how she was like her father. But it's always been there. And and Tracy Borman did an amazing job. And I'm so glad she did get that out there and out in the open and just sit there and go, guys.
Yeah, I loved it. And it was a very easy read too. So when Elizabeth was 2 or 3 and was executed, do you think she had many memories personally of Anne, or was it more the people who were around her told her about her mother?
That is a tough one. I think that I do believe, and I'm obviously making this up, but a 2 or 3-year-old, I have a couple of basic memories without sound, a lot of visual memories that can then get shaped a little bit by the stories that people tell you about the things that happen. So I do hope that she had at least that one core memory and then was able to kind of sum that up with the people around her. I think she felt close to her mother, especially at different times in her life. And I think it would have been helpful to have all the people around her who loved her and loved Anne to get her through that.
During her downfall, Anne made sure to protect Elizabeth in different ways. Didn't she order a lot of clothing for Elizabeth? Could you tell me about that?
Ordered a bunch of clothing for her and also asked Matthew Parker to keep an eye on her. And we know he did. We don't have any information about any kind of communication between her and Matthew Parker until she came to the throne, and she immediately nominated him as her Archbishop of Canterbury. It took him a while to get there, and we know that he didn't really want to do it, but she clearly knew about the connection because somehow she got him to take the job, and it was not a job that he wanted. And so there must have been something. So I put a little bit there in the book, not necessarily the meeting, not him really, because really what could he do? He had a wife, and so he was not part of Mary's regime. And so he couldn't really help her. But I do think that he kept his eye on her and things like that. And he was her Archbishop of Canterbury and did a great job until he died. So that helped. And the people that Anne chose to raise Elizabeth, not the ones that Henry chose. I forget her name, but the nursemaid who had been with Mary and then was taken away to go over to Edward.
Margaret Bryant.
Yeah. But Kat really by Elizabeth's side until they died, both of them.
And that's a great segue because Anne was gone, but then Kat came into her life. And was Kat her mother figure and then her friend later on? Or that seems to be like the most important relationship in her life as a child.
I think so. I really do. Kat was definitely a mother figure until she wasn't. Until Kat kind of displayed that Kat did obviously started out as a mother figure as her initial governess because Kat was educated and worked with her until Elizabeth kind of outgrew her. And then Kat also advised her until Elizabeth outgrew her. And that was really, Elizabeth outgrew Kat several times. But they're still remaining friends the entire time.
Yeah, I mean, Kat dedicated her life to Elizabeth. The fact that she would be in and out of the tower for her and still be loyal, that's asking a lot of a friend.
Yes.
So I feel that Kat was so loyal to her. And then another loyal person was Cecil.
Elizabeth was intensely loyal. And the people that, when she was really young, she couldn't trust a lot of people. A lot of people were terrible to her, so she trusted anyone who was kind to her. And she had to kind of unlearn that. But the people that she really came to depend on, she took them with her entire life. You could, if you look at the beginning of her reign and then squint, you can see the same people around her at the end of her reign. Could be their children, could be their grandchildren, but they were right there. I mean, everyone that you see in book 1, you're going to see in books 2 and books 3. And that's one of the ways I decided who to prioritize in terms of, because obviously she had a larger cast of characters, but I really tried to focus on the people who you would want to see how that relationship evolved over years.
And I think that psychologically, especially as a child, I mean, Nothing Proved is the title of the book, much suspected throughout her whole life. And she could never show her ambition. She had to hide in parts who she was to not offend whoever was the ruler at the time. So that it's interesting that loyalty did go with her whole life, since everyone was saying she wasn't loyal when she was actually the whole time.
Unbelievably loyal.
Yeah, though in the book, the one part that I thought was really interesting that, we'll never really know is when Elizabeth was hearing about Mary's pregnancy updates. I think that was the first time where I saw a little bit of ambition with her, because there was a little bit of her who was kind of like, oh, well, if the baby doesn't survive, then I'm still the heir. Was that on purpose, that part? I love that part.
Yes, I started a little bit earlier, very discreetly. Kind of have to calibrate the ambition. It was when Edward died and Mary was queen. And all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I'm the heir and my sister is 37 and I'm married. This, all of a sudden became a possibility. You can't really, not enough to grab onto, but enough to give you pause. And to really just sit there and go, what if? And then just as the pregnancy issues kind of come up, like, okay, this could happen. But of course, along with that came all of the danger, the heir to the throne and all of the plots, which she had been seeing earlier on, but I don't know that it hit her quite as much. I think that if you look earlier at Thomas Seymour's plan to marry her or to any of that, I don't think she really saw it as taking the throne. I don't think that part was really, obviously she realized that the prosecutors saw it as that, but I don't know that she would have had it in her mind quite as much. I think it got burned into her consciousness, and we'll see that again in the future with Catherine Grey and all of that.
And I think with Edward, it was easier for her to be loyal because they had the shared religion. And with Mary, just from the beginning of their relationship, it starts off terribly. I think that Mary's counsel was always against Elizabeth. So for every good thing that Mary had to say about Elizabeth, they would just, in the same way with Mary Queen of Scots, it was just like, sign the paper. And at one point, there was a paper in front of Mary with a warrant for Elizabeth's execution. Why do you think Mary didn't sign that?
So there was a time when, after Anne Boleyn's execution, Mary took Elizabeth under her wing. I think that there was a time when they were very close. And I think it was much easier for them to be very close when Mary was the wonderful, approved of older sister, and Elizabeth was the, well, you know, this is what happens after your mother's executed for the... So there was a closeness that had to be a little bit weird. And as Elizabeth started to come into her own, as she became a striking young woman and started being in the world, and especially during her brother's reign, held up as, you know, oh, this is the wonderful princess, and Mary, look at you, you're all Catholic. And I tried to show that. You know, at one point I did have the scene where Mary came to court, and Elizabeth was there at the time. So I wanted to show that they were in the room together, and that Mary would kind of remember that as a little bit of a turning point. And it was a tough relationship, but Mary had a very large council. Mary appointed her council in several stages. The first council she appointed were all the people who supported her early. And because these were all Catholics, they weren't as familiar with the running of governments. So then she appointed a bunch, 20 more men who knew how to run the government. And then she was just like, well, there are only a few people I haven't appointed, so could be on my council too. Mary had more than 50 people on her council, which, if you ever tried to, like a board meeting or a committee, with 50 people, you're not listening to anybody. The only people that Mary was listening to were Stephen Gardiner and the Spanish ambassador. Those people hated Elizabeth. I would say that the majority of Mary's council probably liked Elizabeth, was probably defending Elizabeth, and you can identify a few of them who did over the years. But Mary was not listening to them, because that voice was just one among many, and it just kind of got lost. So it was the Spanish ambassador and Gardiner, both of whom hated Elizabeth. So Elizabeth got very lucky that she escaped them.
Yeah, Gardiner was a piece of work, and we know that he really wanted Catherine Parr ousted as well. So it's interesting to see him coming back once Mary is in charge. He's awful. I mean, if it was up to him in the book, she would be executed.
She would have been gone. He wanted Edward Courtney. That was his candidate. Not the brightest man, simply because he was brought up in the Tower, so he had very little in the way of experience in the world, but he was brought up in the Tower. Gardiner was in the Tower, and they got to be friends. Gardiner's true.
And since we're talking about the Tower, one of the most dramatic things in this book, but something that actually happened in real life, was that Mary imprisoned Elizabeth in the Tower in the same rooms that Anne was in during her coronation time. And then Mary also released her on the anniversary of Anne's execution. So this, to me, is why we love the Tudors. This is such a crazy human jealousy, fear moment. Can you believe that was real? And what was it like going in Elizabeth's mind during that time frame?
This is why we love the Tudors. This is the stories write themselves. Yeah, I saw that as a huge moment for Elizabeth to really, and when you really parse down the timing of all of this, the timing of Gardiner trying to sign a fake death warrant, and just as everything followed through, it really was fast. She was suddenly released on May 19th. Was that deliberate? I don't know. Was it deliberate that Bedingfield was the son of the man who had imprisoned Catherine of Aragon? You don't know. What was that Mary's way of going, ha, ha, ha? Or was it just Mary surrounded herself with people who reminded her of Catherine of Aragon? So there you go. Maybe that was it. You don't know. And we get to just put together the stories in a way that makes sense with all the details. And the more details we know, the more fun the stories and interconnections get to be.
Was it when Elizabeth wrote the letter to Mary, was that when she was under house arrest or in the Tower?
There were several letters. The Tides letter
Yes.
was prevent her from going to the Tower, to basically say, no, let me talk to you. You promised me that you would listen to me. Let me talk to you. Let me express to you what I've done. And that's when Mary said no. So that was before. And then she tried to write a bunch of letters, but they just kept on taking away her pen and paper.
Who knows, what the letter that would actually be given to Mary would say during that time period. There's not much trust between if Elizabeth's giving the letter to Gardiner, he's going to throw that in the fire.
As Cromwell did with Anne Boleyn's letter. Although, no, not onto the fire, but just put it on his desk and it'll come back to us 500 years later that Henry never saw it.
Yes, thank you, Thomas, for not burning things but poor Anne, of course.
Paid the price for that.
Absolutely, he did. He absolutely. And I mean, that was another, not to go off topic, but the fact that they found his prayer book that was in the portrait.
I love that. That is, yes. That's a lot of this fun stuff.
Yeah. And it's crazy that there's so many new revelations so many years later.
Elizabeth Catherine Parr basically saved her. So there was a moment where when Catherine Howard came to the throne, and this was another part of like the whole thing with Mary. Catherine Howard and Mary did not get along, but Catherine Howard insisted on honor being shown to Elizabeth. Mm-hmm. Had her sit next to her at dinners with Henry, and all of a sudden, for the first time in ever of Elizabeth's memory, made her feel a part of the court. And then Catherine Howard was gone. A lot of, you could see Henry not wanting to think about not think about Catherine Howard, but also not want to think about Elizabeth or see Elizabeth. And we know that she was away from court for at least a year. I'm not really sure what happened in there, but Catherine Parr brought her back, brought all the kids back and tried to make a family for Henry. And I think that was the closest to, I know that Cat was a mother figure, but Catherine Parr was definitely a mother figure who never had the bad judgment, or it was not somebody that Elizabeth ever outgrew, really, in terms of that mother figure. I think they were very close.
And then, unfortunately, their relationship took a shocking turn once Elizabeth was placed in her household with Thomas. Yeah. But with Catherine, what was it like for her when Elizabeth came into her household? Do you think that she did have, negative intentions? Or do you think she had the best of intentions, wanting to take care of Elizabeth?
I think she had, interesting. I think she had good intentions. I think that if we're going to, okay, one of the great things about the Tudorverse is we have our villains. I know that we keep on rehabilitating villain after villain, and I'm guilty of it with Jane and all of that. But sometimes we just have to keep our villains and just let it be okay. Then I think that Catherine's motives were pure. I do. So do I think that Catherine expected to be regent? Yes. And was kind of annoyed that she wasn't regent as she had been when Henry went off to France. So I don't want to call it ambition, but I think that it was a legitimate dispute about the best way to run the country. And I think she trusted Thomas Seymour much more than anyone else did. So there's that whole judgment piece there. Having Elizabeth come live with her was a wonderful thing. She invited Mary to come live with her too. But Mary was sitting there going, you just married embarrassingly, shamefully quickly. Mary tried to get Elizabeth to come live with her, to say, this is inexcusable. You can't go live with them. And Elizabeth was like, I'm not going to church, because that's really where Elizabeth wanted to be. So I think that there was nothing but goodwill and the best of intentions on both sides.
That's so interesting, because maybe it would have been for the best if she went to stay with Mary instead. But, you know, that's a looking back, you never know.
See, that is, I always have a problem with that, because I think that the lessons that she learned from the whole Thomas Seymour incident saved her during the Wyatt incident. I think that Elizabeth's entire life, every single tragedy, provided the kernel of experience, of knowledge, of wisdom that she then used to meet the next challenge. So if that hadn't happened with Thomas Seymour, had she not been questioned and realized they're going to kill me in order to kill him, that's why they wanted it. So that experience, and that is what I tried to show, was that it was similar. And there were echoes. There were always echoes. So many echoes in Elizabeth's life. It's like the situations, you just see it over and over again. Thomas Seymour, Robert Dudley, dead wife. It's a tough one. So as much as I'd like to spare the problems, that was what made her Gloriana. But then again, I've never been an alternate history person. I can't do it. I just can't, because there are too many little pieces that get messed up along the way.
Yeah, and in Tudor history, it's, as you said, it's already dramatic enough. So during the Thomas Seymour scandal, we are seeing Elizabeth at 12 years old?
14.
14, okay.
14, close to 14, yeah.
She already was so skilled at, while she's having a conversation in her head, she's like, say less instead of more. Be very careful what you say, so there's nothing that could be misinterpreted. For such a young woman, do you think that was the beginning of her survival instincts kicking in?
That was, but again, go back to the whole Anne Boleyn and being out of favor with her father. You know, when she opens her mouth, she has the opportunity to say something stupid, or not necessarily stupid, but something that is going to anger her father. So she starts to know to pull back a little. So I didn't get to show that then. But yes, I think that all of these steps taught her to be naturally cautious. And I think it was the Thomas Seymour incident that taught her that the caution was important, not just from a personal side, but also from the political side. And I think that was a key flip.
Something that must have been really confusing for her is that Kat started to promote the idea of a marriage between her and Thomas. And I think that was when we kind of were like, Kat, that's not a good idea.
So historians agree that Elizabeth's behavior before Kat died and after Kat died, there are two very different situations. Once Kat had died, if you really think about it, Thomas Seymour was the perfect husband for her, assuming a healthy Prince Edward and assuming all of the other things. So Thomas Seymour was little Edward's, not Edward Seymour, but little Edward's favorite uncle. He and Catherine Parr had been trying to be regents for the king, but even so, the king was how old? When he's going to be a grown-up, he'll get to make his own choices and all of that. Thomas Seymour would have been a better choice than running off to some foreign country, a match with, a doddering old man to shore up succession, shore up alliances. It would have been a really good, assuming Thomas Seymour hadn't gone off the rails, based on what they knew at the time, it made a lot of sense. And so, was it not the best judgment? It was not the best judgment. Even though it would have been a good match, wait a couple of years, wait just a little bit, a little bit of discretion and all of that, and that would have been fine. So, but it ended up being a real problem.
One of my favorite quotes of the book, and I'm not sure if this happened in real life, but after Thomas was executed, she said, "This day died a man of much wit and little judgment." That is a hell of a line.
Isn't it though? That is, yes. People question whether she said it. She is reported to have said it. It seems like an amazing thing to come out of the mouth of someone so young. At the same time, she would have had a lot of time to think about it. One of the things she was really good about doing was marking moments, understanding that there were certain moments that needed to be marked. So, when this wasn't in this book, but later on, when she goes to the tower for the first time as queen, and she just looks around and waits and just says, many have come from this place to be, or there have been princes that have come to this place, and, no, I am one who comes from this place to be a prince. And in those cases, it was a mark of God's judgment. This now is a mark of his grace. And, so it's the kind of thing where she has come out with the stuff that has come down to us. And we know that she's really good at the perfect response to a moment. And she would have had enough warning to think about this a little bit. So I absolutely believe she said it.
Me too.
And people thinking fine, but she said it.
I think it's also just an interesting contrast, because what did Edward VI write in his journal? He was like very cold about his uncle dying. I know you would know this.
Yes, this was when Somerset was executed. The only thing he said was, "My Lord Somerset was executed on Tower Hill at 9:00 this morning." Now, a lot of people see this as heartless. I take the opposite approach. I see so much emotion in that. And that's how I wrote it in The Boy King. I see such suffering in that he just couldn't, what's he going to do? I'm really sad. No, he's just going to say it. And I think that kind of just with nothing else, no embellishments, I see it an enormous amount of pain in there. That's why I write fiction. I like to add the emotions that I believe are there.
And it sets the tone for a very, very dangerous time, because, the child king is executing his mother's only living family. And I think a lot of people vilify Mary, because right off the bat, Jane, unfortunately, was executed, poor Jane. But that was kind of Edward's mess, I have to say, although he was a child. But, he did put that succession crisis going in on there. What was that like for Elizabeth?
Again, let's bring in another famous Tudorverse. Bad guy. That was Northumberland. Let's blame him. Let's bring in our villains where we need them. I can't imagine to realize, like, wait a minute, and you wonder how much she understood. I think she understood a bunch. I think that because, remember, she tried to go visit her brother while he was sick, and she was turned away. And this was right after Northumberland had tried to make friends with her, saw that she got all the properties that she was entitled to under her father's will, brought her into court, made her feel very welcome, and now all of a sudden she's being turned away. And then a few weeks later, he's marrying his son into the line of succession and doing a couple more marriages besides, where you had all of the ambassadors. This was clearly a big court event to which neither Elizabeth nor Mary was invited, and that the king didn't attend. So why didn't Edward attend? He was too sick, obviously. But I mean, it just goes on and on that she could find. I think she saw the writing on the wall, but there was just nothing that could be done.
And was Jane also at the Seymour household with Elizabeth, or is that a myth?
No, she was there. I don't know if she was there that early or came. She showed up. I believe that she would have seen part of it. So it's an interesting that kind of, what did she think of that whole thing? And
that must have been shocking to, a girl close to her own age it's clear that it's the parents, the father meddling, and then to be killed by her sister. Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been a really difficult time for Elizabeth, because maybe that was the closest the axe had swung to her in her life. We're getting around that time period.
Mary tried to be merciful. Mary, she didn't release Jane, but she did release Henry Grey from the Tower. And so how bad Elizabeth felt for Jane would have been tempered by the fact that Henry Grey championed his daughter in Wyatt's rebellion. And that made it arguably, was it to crown Elizabeth or was it to crown Jane Grey? That made Elizabeth's position safer, in fact, that Henry Grey was involved with this, because it could have been for Jane Grey. And that is the point at which Mary had Jane Grey executed. And that goes back to Henry. And it goes back to human nature. When you've done something wrong to someone, you have this consciousness that you've done them wrong and you're waiting for them to get back at you, and you're more likely to try something wrong again. And that's why traitors always have to be killed, apparently. I don't know, I read that psychological theory somewhere. Okay, I buy it.
Do you think this is when Elizabeth decided she would never marry, this time period? Or do you think it was even earlier with like Catherine Howard, or do you think it was more like around Edward time?
We have a quote from her when she was 8 years old saying, "I will never marry." She told Robert Dudley that, and she was very clear from then. I don't know that an 8-year-old says something, you don't necessarily believe them. And the way I've been writing these books, you don't really see it here, but I stuck in a bunch of reasons why she was not comfortable with marriage. She clearly at this time learned that her saying, "I don't intend to marry," got her out of a lot of pressure to marry. It was a much easier argument to make. So, okay, at this point, she's like saying, "I'm not going to marry," but do we really believe her? Then she gets into her queenship, and marriage was the ultimate tool, the ultimate offensive, defensive. She had the perfect weapon. She'd use any time she liked, but she could only use it once. So there was a natural, her whole thing was always delay until things are right. So she didn't want to use it for a very long time. And at some point, it just really, there were so many reasons just added on, and that was it. But why she would not want to marry is all clear right now. And it's just amazing that she did follow through on it.
And I always think it's so crazy that Henry never married off Mary or Elizabeth when they were younger, which I think, if we are able to look back on history, that's why the Tudor dynasty did not continue on, because neither had children. None of his children had children. It seems like he would have used them, but it was like for Mary, it's every time he had an agreement with another king, he was kind of bartering them off, but he never actually married them off. And I know it's a part of it is because he delegitimized them. So it's like, who are they? But still, don't you think it's kind of odd that he never sought a real marriage for them and like encouraged them to have children?
Oh, that's a terrifying thing. These people are in the line of succession. These are women whose husbands will be tempted by the crown. So it was always an unspoken thing that nobody was going to be married until Edward was married and had a child, so that there would be less danger. And you can see, again, Tudorverse echoes, you'll see echoes of that during Elizabeth's reign, where she just kept on saying, "No, I'm not going to let Catherine Grey get married." because any son she has will be dangerous. She didn't want Catherine Grey to marry, there were negotiations for her to marry Spain or Scotland. And it was like, what, am I crazy? I'm going to get somebody a weapon to use against me? No, that's not going to happen. Now, Catherine Grey, we know what happened. She ended up marrying for love a Seymour, the son of the man who executed Thomas Seymour for trying to do the exact same thing with Elizabeth. So Catherine Grey married a man who should have known better. Of all the people in this world, he knew better and married her anyway. So, there are marriage when you're in the line of succession is very dangerous. And another echo, book 3, Arbella Stewart. So it's a very uncomfortable thing to have a healthy male heir as an alternative. It was a dangerous thing back then.
Was that like an English thing, or was that just like a royal court thing at that time? Because of course there were international marriages.
So, if you look back at Henry VII's time, he had 4 kids, and he had Arthur, and he had Henry. Arthur married Catherine of Aragon, and then, the 2 daughters, the dynasty was secured, so the daughters could go and be used elsewhere, and they could be comfortable in the fact that this was just royal blood to make the alliances secure. That's how kings did from the very start. And then Henry VIII never had that kind of full bench. As to use a sports analogy, never had the kind of bench that would permit him to do that. So anybody that he married his daughters to, he was giving away a claim to the throne that would then threaten his own son. And if Edward had been of age, it might have been different. But with Edward only 9 years old, that's a very vulnerable position. He knew he was leaving his son in a very vulnerable position, and he wasn't going to further weaken him by giving other people claims that they could use against him.
And it seems that Henry in particular was more afraid of marrying Reginald Pole or having some type of Spanish alliance.
Of course, right there, yes, and he was right. He was right, too, about Mary making a Spanish alliance. So there you go.
But then years later, Mary makes that alliance with Philip. And that's a change for Elizabeth, too. Now she has a brother-in-law who's extremely powerful. But their dynamic, especially in the book, it's so much more nuanced than you would hear. Because it's almost like he wanted Elizabeth to be on his good side. He wanted her to know enough gossip from the ambassador to feel like she's in on it, but of course never the full story. So what inspired you to write about their relationship in this way, Philip and Elizabeth?
I think that their relationship, you kind of see the way they were monarchs. I think that this affected the rest of their lives. I think it affected the Armada. I think there was, I don't want to say a weirdness there, but there was. He championed Elizabeth's right to the throne because the next best bet was Mary Stuart, who was then engaged to the Dauphin of France. So the last person he wanted on the throne was Mary Stuart. Without Elizabeth, the rival claimants just were nowhere near as strong, and it would have been France. So clearly he had a reason to champion Elizabeth, but he was only going to champion her if he perceived her to be Catholic enough. So she had to, and she knew this, and she tried to charm him. And later on, as they're starting to come to loggerheads and England and Spain are starting to fight, in my mind, she still had a vision of the Philip that she knew when she was young, never believing that he'd never come after me. He loves me, and I think that piece, she never believed that he actually would until late in the game. So she started a little bit late. But the music piece, I had a fun time. They both loved music. And on their deathbeds, both of them had the choristers brought in to play the holy music behind them so that they had the music as they were slipping away, and they both did that. They both loved the music, so that would be a natural way for them to bond a little bit and to really convince him of her Catholic roots.
I don't think she believed that Philip loved Mary. It's sad because, Mary's looking at his portrait and then he's always leaving. But it seems like she was a little fooled by him, but Elizabeth not at all.
Elizabeth not at all. No one was fooled by him. The question of how much they knew then, that we have Philip on record telling one of his men, who then wrote it back to Spain. So we have it going, poor Philip, he's really not happy about this.
He should have been lucky to have her.
He's praying for strength to do this because it's not coming naturally.
Yeah, and little did he know he was king of England. Later on, people were king consorts and all that. Wasn't he the full king of England with Mary? Or was he a consort?
Gardiner negotiated a really good agreement that would have kept him at consort level. His father, kind of understanding what was going on, stepped back from the throne of, I think it was Italy, so that Philip could get the title king, so that King Philip could marry Queen Mary. And no matter what, he would always be referred to as King Philip because he was a king, whether or not he was king, because he was never crowned. And the council was supposed to look only to Mary, according to the terms of the treaty, but Mary wanted to be a traditional wife and kept on saying, Philip will decide, and really stepping back and allowing Philip to do it. So what he technically was and what he actually was are both a little bit more amorphous, but he was clearly running England, or England was being run for his benefit. As we found when we lost Calais and declared war on France and all of that, and that wasn't supposed to happen according to the treaties.
And that's really when Elizabeth, I think, kind of fully, it seems in the book, is saying, Mary's not a good queen. She lost Calais. She's making these mistakes. She's being fooled by Philip. She's having these horrible pregnancies that don't end up being pregnancies. And people started coming, especially as Mary seemed to be growing ill, then courtiers were coming to pay court to Elizabeth. But it was still very dangerous because they didn't know Mary was going to die or not. And Elizabeth didn't want word going back to Mary that all these people are coming to show her loyalty. So what do you think about that time period? Is that when Elizabeth was like, you know what? I might be queen. I need to start preparing? Or do you think she was still, oh, well, maybe the baby will live? Or
I think she started after the first child that turned out not to be a child. I think that's when she realized this could happen. There was a lot that could derail it, but at that point, it really could happen. And I think that's when she started being extremely careful. And also learning, after the whole Wyatt's Rebellion, she was very careful then not to do anything that could technically get her killed. She was careful not to cross the treason line. And I maintain that because I look how she treated Mary Stuart later on. She did not believe that Mary Stuart was actually part of all of this plotting because it would take an idiot to lend her name to a plot when the plot was going to go ahead, whether or not your name was on it, and just do the right thing. You are queen, you are all of that. Do the right thing and you're safe. So she protected Mary Stuart as, because I believe, and she protected Mary Stuart because she was innocent, but at the same time, that experience taught her was her innocence almost didn't matter. That even though she hadn't crossed the line moves depending on where the ruler wants to place it. And so, you must have been involved, or you would have told us about it, or you must have been involved, or you wouldn't have thought about getting away to safety. You must have been involved. And I think that is, a lot of fear came from that. But getting back to an earlier question, I think that Mary's failures, Mary's giving away so much power to a husband, was another example. I mean, just look at all the examples that are popping out of women whose husbands messed them up. Women who chose the wrong husband, and look at what's happening to them. And Mary's problems with ruling came from giving too much to Philip. And I think that was a really important lesson that Elizabeth saw about what a real queen does and how you act, and helped her make a distinction between how you act as a queen and how you act as a woman. And Mary was trying to do both, and really can't, because back then a woman had to be a St. Paul, do exactly what your husband says. And so there was that tension in between that. It was really difficult to resolve. And I think that's another factor that kept Elizabeth from marrying.
Do you think before Mary's death, Elizabeth and Mary were able to reconcile? You write about the end of their relationship, of course.
No, I don't. Mary was facing a situation similar to the one that Edward had faced, that she was going to die and the next heir was not the religion she wanted her to be. And she tried to, before she would acknowledge Elizabeth as her heir, even though Parliament had done that, and Mary technically didn't need to, but before she did acknowledge Elizabeth as her heir, she sent the message going, okay, I'll do this only if you promise to maintain the religion as I've left it. And Elizabeth said, I can't do that. You have to trust me on this, but no, I'm not making that promise. Now, she softened it as to, and, talked about minor changes that she's going to make. Just, no, not exactly as you've instituted it, but, this is the throne, and you don't get to dictate from beyond the grave.
Absolutely. So behind the scenes during this time, Cecil is preparing for Elizabeth's government to take place. You write about a conversation that he had. I forget who the person was right now, but I remember the conversation where they were talking about getting the seal to Elizabeth. But they were being very careful because obviously the conversation was treason because they were imagining the death of Mary, but they were trying so hard, even alone with each other, to not say something that the other person could use. What do you think that time was like for Cecil?
Cecil was as cautious as Elizabeth was. It must have been terrifying. I mean, everyone knew that Cecil was going to be the guy, and that must have freaked him out. I know, we didn't say anything. But Archbishop Heath, Lord Privy Seal, and needs to hand the seal over. They absolutely met. Cecil came to his home on the Strand. They met, but the seal was not given over at the time, but they did meet. So you had to go around and make the alliances with nothing in writing and nothing said directly, and just very carefully. We all pray the Queen survives. We're all praying for her and doing things that way, because people are starting to wonder, will it be me? Am I going to be? Who's going to be in this? Everybody's looking to the future.
That was also really such a fraught time for Elizabeth, because she keeps hearing that Mary's days from death, and then days go by. But it is her sister at the end of the day who she's waiting for to die for her great future. Do you think that was a difficult time for her, or was she just ready to go forward?
I think the whole idea that Anne Boleyn's daughter was this close to inheriting the English throne when Mary was married to Philip with armies and with this and that, the idea that the throne could come to Anne Boleyn's daughter was so crazy in the minds of so many. I think she was just sitting there going, okay, I think we know that Elizabeth was superstitious. We know that she was really careful, that she had John Dee and really did not want to take chances. So I think she was just keeping a very tight rein on her emotions and just ready for something to go wrong because terrified. I think she was just holding on, not getting excited until it actually happened. And so I think that was a lot there.
And what was it like for her to start feeling the support after all these years? Now suddenly people are coming to pay favor to her. She knows some of these people were against her before, and they're just here because they know she's going to be queen. What was that like for her?
So I think she had everybody's number. I think that the people who came early really, she understood that those were her real friends. She knew who her real friends were. She knew who was there for her. Like Robert Dudley selling lands for her, like William Cecil advising her and keeping her posted, like Effingham. You know, all of these people, she knew who was on her side. And those are the people she especially rewarded. But there's a piece of her that went back to Henry VII, who turned around and, his attitude was, I don't really have room for waste in my kingdom. So if you're going to be loyal to me now, okay, you've done this forever. This has been your family position. Okay, you can go ahead and do that. And she wasn't going to throw them away, but she wasn't going to especially advance them. She knew she had people's number. I do believe.
I agree. And of course, so now we're coming up to the end of the book. The book ends with Mary's death.
Yeah.
That is one of the most exciting points in Elizabeth's life, although kind of tragic. Do you think that we're going into the next book as we'll probably have the coronation? Are you excited for what's to come in the next book?
The next book is really good. The next two books are really good. This was a lot of it. Again, the people you've seen in this book, you're going to be seeing again. And this was a wonderful chance to tell the origin stories of all of that. And now you're going to see all of these characteristics play out.
So for the book club, I chose your book first because I think there are a lot of people who love the Tudors who are afraid of historical fiction and they want to stick to the nonfiction. The reason why I chose your book is because I think it does stay as close to history as possible. But do you think that there's any pressure when you're writing historical fiction to try to stay accurate, or do you believe that the author should just have the freedom?
I think the beauty is in the accuracy. I think that, especially in the Tudorverse, it is so much better when you can be accurate. Now, one of the great things about the Tudorverse is that there's a wide range of what is accurate. And I'm trying to think, nobody has accused me of inaccuracies, but if they did, I could point to a biographer that actually said that. Now, we obviously have certain things that we know are eminently fallible, like the Spanish Chronicle that famously got the order of Henry's wives wrong. They put Catherine Howard before Anne of Cleves. And so a lot of their stories are just wrong. And we know that. So I'm not relying on any of those stories. But if you look at the different biographers over the years, they've taken very different positions on just about everything. So, it really is what you think is right. Even if you're writing nonfiction, it is what you think is right affects what you choose to include and what you don't choose to include. So I absolutely want to be as accurate as possible, but I do have a lot of different ways to do that. So, but thank you. I try. Let's put it that way.
And you succeed. And I can't wait for the next two. I just want to thank you for doing this interview. I could talk to you for the next 10 hours, but I won't take your time. But if you ever want to talk Tudor, I'm here.
Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you so much for all your support over the years, and you mean so much to our community.
This is a community. So thank you.
Okay, alrighty. Thank you, Janet.